this work?
Okay, that's better. Yeah.
Hello, welcome. Come in, come in.
Okay, settle in, guys. Hey, good evening all. Happy Monday. Neil Gilks, Program Director, BFA. Brandon over there in the front row, looking handsome. It's a Monday night, and this is the second in our line of in conversations with incredible industry people who spare their time and want to share their experience, something which should hopefully positively impact you. There's an opportunity for conversation. There's definitely going to be some lively debate. No debate. We're here to learn from those people who are really wonderful at doing what they do. But just a quick thank you to everyone who's involved in the success of organizing and helping and assisting. So everyone within the School of Fashion officers, it's like, we had a wheel fall off a cart, we dropped popcorn. It was a real shit show earlier on. But look at us now. So thank you to everyone over there. And indeed to Mariana, who helps to organize these wonderful opportunities.
Thank you.
Also to Rachel Lifter, who guides us through the ceremony so wonderfully. We have two incredible young ladies with us this evening who've really impacted the world of fashion and the world of design in many, many ways. We are really honored to have you both here, Mary, Marsha. Thank you so much for giving up Monday night.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Enough from me. I'm going to hand you over to Rachel. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, welcome. All right, so what we have today, we have Mary Ping from Sew and Steady Wins the Race and Marsha Patmos from M. Patmos. I was hoping that you could just briefly introduce yourselves, but I also have larger introductory questions, and we can get into the kind of themes of the evening from there. So this conversation, just before we get into introductions, this is based around what does it take to make a collection? Okay, so we're going to think about that theme and relate it to a variety of discussions. So firstly, the core values that shape your company, but also thinking about where your company sits in the fashion industry, how you locate yourself within this broader kind of business, and then also thinking about what your business and production and design practices are, from sourcing and manufacturing all the way to artistic collaborations and thinking about your design and brand identity. Okay, so that's our general kind of story for tonight. And yeah, if you'll just briefly introduce yourselves and then we'll jump in.
Hi, I'm Mary Ping. Most everyone knows the line that I operate under, which is called Slow and Steady Wins the Race. It started in 2002, and it actually serves as somewhat antithetical approach to the fashion system as we recognize it now. And so collections are based on categories of what we wear, and we treat it as a living archive. So nothing really is obsolete, and that's actually the main core value, is we make sure that nothing is designed to be obsolete. So, and with that, everything's kind of we have this sort of mantra in the studio where it's conceptual classics that are timely and timeless. And every category is centered around something that you recognize in your own closet. So it could be anything from the white T-shirt, and there's a commentary on the white T-shirt, to shoe, and how would we kind of break down what the shoe is, or something like sunglasses. It's how do we break down what sunglasses are, as an object, or how they sit in the world, or what we recognize them as a contemporary object that we interact with every day. And so that's our day-to-day in the studio, and it's kind of communicated through installations, which are, again, a little bit purposefully opposite of what runway shows are. It's only because this way we can show what we're kind of doing in a better way, and akin to what we need to do. So Yeah, that's it.
Hi, I'm Marcia Patmos of M. Patmos, and I've had my line since 2011, and also a previous line for 10 years before that called Lutzen Patmos. Both lines are known for knitwear and textiles, and I have a less, maybe strict version of thinking, but we think in the same way. Like everything I design is meant to be saved until you lose it, basically, or passed along. Nothing is meant to be thrown away. I'm against throwaway fashion. And I work with artisans to make most of my clothing. And I do start the design process kind of like with the sourcing at the same, really on the same level as the inspiration, which we can talk about more.
Great. Well, thank you both. Okay, so I want to use those introductions as launching points into the next question, to kind of tap into and kind of explore those core values a little bit further. So, Mary, on the Slow and Steady Wins the Race website, you have a really nice About Me page where you kind of go over some of the things that you just went over. And now on there, you have what you set out as, in my mind, like a research question. So what do we wear? Why do we wear it? And how can we create new classics that are timely and timeless, unique and universal? So what was the process of coming to that question? And then how does that question inform your design process?
Let me think. I mean, the full-on sort of like storytelling of it, like no smoke and mirrors kind of thing, is like I actually did my undergrad at Vassar, and I love my parents, but they were like, oh, you need to like, do something else. I think they were just really worried about the idea of like what are you gonna, like fashion that's crazy or something, And so, but I was at Vassar and I was like obsessed, and I couldn't stop thinking about like, clothing, but that allowed me to really dig deep and think about like, well, yeah, like I mean, I kind of nerded out. I was like, yeah, why does the white t-shirt look like that? Like why is it like hasn't changed since like, the first appearance of it as an undergarment, but then it became like, it's so iconic on like James Dean. Same with like jeans, like Levi Strauss, I forget the year, but we're talking like 1800s, and it really hasn't like evolved that much since, like everything that we're wearing now. So that's like a mainstay. So I kind of was just like completely fascinated always about like, watching what people wore, how that was like a sort of like visual communication of like what they were maybe expressing, or like why there were these sort of cultural movements related to clothing, everything from like tribal, sort of like this idea of tribalism of like, oh, this is how you identify as a group, especially like with music. It's like, oh, if you listen to like punk music, you dress a certain way, or like if you were listening to some other music and you went to a show, you could see some people who were like similarly dressed. So I was just constantly thinking like, yeah, why is it like that, and how does it become that way? And so when I was like thinking along those terms, and then when I actually sat down to like design, I realized like, oh, I can actually design based on those questions as well. So then the easiest thing was like, oh, well, why don't I just like dissect it into like a library, and not so much like, at one point I did sit down, I was like, oh, I'll just start with A. And I was like, couldn't really like pick anything to start from A. And then I was like, well, what would be the A for like the library of clothing? And so I was like, oh, seams, like that's how you put clothing together. So that's how the first collection started. It was like, okay, I'm just going to do a collection about seams. And yeah, so that's kind of how I started thinking about things.
So can you take us through, I'm actually jumping ahead of my questions, but can you so your first collection was on seams. Can you take us through a couple of the other collections and what the themes that you focused on?
Well,
Kept asking that question through different collections.
Yeah, I think well, the easiest was like I'm gonna skip like 2, but I kept walking around. This was like probably 2003, so it's like, like Sex and the City was like really huge on TV, and like And I just remember, like that's right when I started the line, and I, had friends helping, and then also even just like friends who were like, oh, I have another friend who's looking for an internship, and they're kind of interested in fashion. Could they, help you out and stuff? And so, but the thing that really struck me was like at that time, I feel like the height of like the status bag was just like out of control, like Fendi bag, Chloe bag, Balenciaga motorcycle bag. And, it didn't matter like what you could be wearing like a tank top and jeans, but it's just like you had this like bejeweled Fendi bag that was just like every season was just like another iteration. I just felt like it hit like this crazy critical mass. But I was like thinking about it, I was like, this is crazy, because like every company was trying to compete to do that one. So I thought like, I actually remember calling up a friend. I was like, I have this crazy idea. What if I did for the next Sloan Study like micro collection, like I'm just gonna do the same exact bags, but in canvas. Like I'm gonna research like the specs. I'm gonna like duplicate it. I'm gonna replace the sort of like expensive things with a little bit more like a utilitarian equivalent, and like, like the Dior saddle bag, instead of like a actual metal D and like the serif font, it was just like a D ring, with like twill tape, and it was like all canvas. It was like raw edged, Yeah.
I'm trying to follow.
Yeah. So we did that. I mean, we did that, and I just, it's funny because like people still reference those things, like people who probably don't know the work beyond that, just know that work, And I always say like that's probably just going to be on my headstone when I die. But yeah, so that was kind of like a commentary. But that's a good example. And then like another one down the line, we did tackle like white t-shirt. So it was just that plain white pocket tee. And then, and I thought like, okay, well, I don't know, there's something about like the material that's kind of like the core in what you recognize as the white pocket tee. And so I thought like, well, what if we just did like 10, same shape, but like 10 materials from like kind of like almost like lightweight to heavyweight. It's almost like sheer to opaque. So we had like mesh, lace, silk, velvet, corduroy, and then like leather, in this sort of like gradient, but all white. And so, so I feel like that really small twist really transforms just the white pocket tee, because people recognize it, and it says so many different things, because you can wear the mesh one and it has like a different connotation than wearing like the silk one. Like people say like, oh, I have the silk one and I can wear it. It's perfect because I like wear it to work, but then I can put on like a really nice like long skirt and like wear it to like my evening thing. Or like the mesh, they just feel like it's it just starts telling a different story, with the white t-shirt. But yeah, I think those are like easy examples. Yeah.
That's great. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so Marcia, you were recently a finalist for the CFDA Plus Lexus initiative, the focus of which was about sustainability. We have like a little video from it. I think you sent it in. Is it okay if we watch that? All right.
Zero impact, climate positive. I want to be able to say, that's a good brand.
Now more than ever, there is a real intention around sustainability. It's not just a buzz or a warm and fuzzy word.
Now more than ever, there's a strategic imperative. So to be able to create through clean processes, a design intervention is fantastic.
Lexus started the partnership with the CFDA to help designers elevate the level of sustainability within their businesses. Activating meaningful change is really complicated. Businesses face significant challenges.
If all these small businesses can incorporate aspects of sustainability collectively, they can make an impact.
It's a great group of designers this year, all owned by women, which is pretty powerful. And they're diverse in category and approach, whether that be around material, working with artisans, handmade. Each of it's very unique.
What makes this initiative special, it engages the designers when they're at a stage when they're able to build their model based on new ideas.
People who know material, know working with artisans, take what they do and make it cohesive for designers who are still finding their journey.
When they leave this program, they're going to leave with so many blueprints, roadmaps, data to really be informed as they continue to be creators in fashion.
Sustainability today is no longer about putting your ideas on a diet, but it is about navigating choice. It's about driving their goals forward in a more focused way.
The big change I see happening is you have big companies now saying, how do we do that? It's the inspiration and the experience that this program is creating at an emergent level, which is now rising up to those more established companies.
The only way we're going to get better and make the fashion business less impactful on the environment is to do it together. Collaboration hasn't always been the history of fashion, but it's definitely the future.
Okay, so I have a couple questions about your work, obviously, but then thinking about it in relation to this prize. And so you had already started to develop what you already mentioned, working with artisans, developing, focusing on fabrics, and thinking about, the creation in a sense of, dare I call it like a sustainable luxury? Is that cool? Okay, cool. Could you talk a little bit about that and your brand's kind of core values? But then also, my second part of the question is, to what extent were those like values like shaped and honed through a process like this?
Such a long. I'll skip back for 1 second to when I was in school, which I sometimes forgot about. But my thesis when I was at school at RISD was about. It was based on armor, and it was thinking about women in the workplace. And so it was designing clothing based on armor for women that was feminine yet protective, which I graduated in 1987. And it's still a valid point right now, I think. And so my clothing is meant to just feel very comfortable at all times, so you're always at your best, whatever, to walk into any situation, whether you're, going to work or going to an event or doing whatever. And I also, like Mary, I was thinking, I started Lutz and Patmos around that same time. It was like Sex and the City time. And for our branding also, we were trying to be the opposite. Yeah. Yeah, everything was like Fendi, Chanel, whatever. And so our branding was very quiet, and we made these certain seams in the back that was our only detail. But anyway, that was sort of a aside that you reminded me of. But I've always wanted to design things that are something that you live with. Especially, in the beginning of my career, I worked for big companies like The Gap, which was amazing, and I recommend anyone to go do it for experience, but it can burn you out. And also, I got completely burned out to the point that I either just wanted to stop doing fashion or completely do it in a different way, which is why I started Lutz and Patmos, which was designing your favorite sweaters that were really, really well made, that you wanted to keep for years. And then my designs now are the same. And it's also morphed along the way to be really about the production process. And I think also doing something for such a long time, your interests change and morph a little bit, and things change. So I've always been interested in textiles and artisans, et cetera, but I've been doing a lot more with that. And then this, the CFDA Alexis program is kind of amazing, actually. It's the second year that they did it. The first year they had, I think 18 months was the program, and they decided it was too long, so ours was 9 months, and it was pretty intense. It was kind of like being in grad school for sustainability, which was pretty amazing. So we had all these workshops and speakers and projects, and we had to write a grant proposal, and we did a project with NYU Stern Business School kids. Like, we did all kinds of different things, but it was really about, it was a multifaceted way at looking at sustainability, like making your business more sustainable business-wise, like with the NYU kids, and then more sustainable in the eco-friendly kind of way, but then also just the wide variety of all of that gets discussed. And actually, Timo was one of the advisors on that program, who, I don't know if you guys have him, but I'm not exactly sure what he teaches here, but yeah, but he was a great advisor. And so for our project, for our grant proposal, we wanted to do a deep dive into our supply chain, because as a small company, I have limited time and budget for doing things like this, like traveling all over the place. And I do work with my suppliers in a way, like, technology is great. It allows us to do things remotely. And so I do travel to other countries, and people do travel here, but then a lot we do by WhatsApp and JPEGs and everything. And I have gone to those countries, but usually I work with, like, the main person who organizes everything for me, and maybe some visits to workshops, et cetera. But this time I really wanted to see, like, every last person that I work with. So I went to Peru, and those pictures were my footage from being in Peru. And I went to every single workshop that we work with, and every single supplier and dye house, et cetera, which was amazing, and also met new people. And then I sent my employee to Nepal and India to do the same thing. And it was really amazing. And one thing that's always been important to me is kind of the thread that connects people. Like the people who sew your clothing or spin your yarn or whatever. It's an important thread that goes along the entire way. And I think it's more important now, even with the world so crazy. So I do think about that a lot. And I'm trying to think. Yeah, in that project, we had kind of a thesis project at the end. It was called our Blueprint for the Future. And we had to map out our company in terms of sustainability up until 2020. And so we made a grid, which I don't know if I sent it to you. I probably didn't, actually. I should have sent that to you. But we made a map of our company and its sustainability goals, in like 3 or 5 year blocks. And we kind of made a pledge to, by 2020, not be using any virgin fibers. And one thing I am known for is cashmere, which is not really very sustainable at all. It's, what do you call it? What is it called? The goats are eating all the grass in Mongolia and causing dust storms. What is that called?
We have
like erosion, right?
We have a mini video that speaks
that?
a little bit about. We have a mini video.
Okay.
Let's play it. It talks about that.
I should have sent you that other thing.
The blueprint, yeah.
This is not a great industry for the world. Something I'm wrestling with is cashmere. I'm known for cashmere, but it's not the most sustainable fiber. Really smart people are figuring out ways to use waste. Yarn made out of cork and felt made of plastic water bottles. The world is running out of resources. You have to think ahead and think of other things we can use.
That's it.
Thank you for remembering that. So I always use natural fibers no matter what. Cotton, silk, cashmere, merino wool, leather, somewhat. But during this program, with the deep dive, I was really looking at everything, because even though things are natural, they aren't totally good always. And then there's a lot of ways you can weigh things too, like cotton takes up tons and tons of water, where actually polyester doesn't. So there's different things you can weigh and argue and all this stuff, and it's very interesting to explore, But
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating, and it's fascinating that it comes out of the project that allows you to explore your own practices. I mean, do you think that so I guess, yeah, do you think that project has helped you kind of rethink the core values of your brand or identify different ways of addressing them?
yes, I mean, we knew that we were working with too many suppliers already. So part of, it was part of what we were thinking about. And when we knew we had to do this project with the NYU Stern Business School kids, that was the project we assigned to them. And it was really interesting the way they approached it because of the program we were in and what they knew about my company. Instead of just being very analytical like business school kids without thinking about other values, they came up with this really interesting system of grading. And I think it was like 1 through 10 with all these different criteria. And it included, I wish I had sent you that thing, actually. It included so many things. But part of it was like things I care about, like working with a women's cooperative, or also now everything is about storytelling. So storytelling is a big part of things in the fashion industry now with Instagram, and everyone wants video clips, and also just customers do really want to know things about where their clothing came from. Like when I do trunk shows or have, meet with customers in person, they really do want to know, and they find it interesting if this is vegetable dyed or this is handmade or whatever. So the criteria, the way we graded each factory that we work with helped them prioritize for us who they felt was the best supplier for us, actually. And then edit down. We knew we wanted to edit down to ideally one country, but at least fewer countries than we were working with. But working with artisans or even just different techniques, you end up working with people, around the world, because different people are good at different things. So it did help us focus. And our main priority spots were Peru, because of so many reasons. Like there's a really rich heritage of artisan goods there. They can make everything. And they're pretty sustainable. Like something I've always done, or for quite a long time, is I try to work with materials that are very close to the vicinity of the factory or supplier that I'm working with. So you're not flying things from like Japan to wherever, instead just try to use what's in Japan, to keep it like a lower carbon footprint, because everything gets shipped anyway if it has to come here or has to go to a web order somewhere else, which is less carbon footprint or more carbon footprint or whatever, but at least trying to have it produced in a small radius. So really trying to concentrate on that. And Peru is rich in materials. They have all kinds of beautiful cotton and alpacas and llamas, etc. And then the USA was also something that was the second high priority for us, because it's something, I do love making things made in USA, but it's a real labor of love in the past. So I actually had to halt it for myself, just for the reasons of being a tiny company. And also the materials you can get here are limited. You mostly have to import them. But I do have a new supplier here that's just in Bay Ridge, and they're doing an interesting program where they're stocking a bunch of fiber that's really good for me to use, merino wool. And so we're starting a new program that's launching this fall with them. So that's really interesting, actually, as a new core program for me, just made right where I can take the N train or take the water taxi, whatever. And then I am pretty much cutting out China, and I'm doing my wovens in India right now, also for reasons of what they can supply me, and also the kinds of factories they are, the fair trade, etc.
It's really interesting what you're talking about, not least because right now the students we have our design ideas, and now we're trying to kind of prototype and think through materials and use the materials to really inspire design. And so it's interesting to hear about the broader industry questions of where do you get materials, how do you get materials, and then how does your design process come out of that? To what extent for both of you, Mary, on your website, you say that you use the simplest material, simplest fabrics and materials. And these questions you're bringing up, Marcia, about, where does wool come from, what wool you're going to use, how does those questions of materiality, of fabrication, inform your design process for both of you?
A lot, actually. And it's funny because, when I was, when you're in school, or even I have interns or assistants or whatever that aren't so familiar with the production process, they're so free and they just draw things and think of things and they don't really care or know, it's not that they don't care, they don't know how it's made or how it's attached or what it's made of. Or sometimes there's a sketch of something that, maybe they're thinking of, or they're not even sure what it is that they're drawing, if it's a knit or a woven or whichever. And sometimes, for me, it's freeing to see that, because then I can look at it and I can think oh, that's cool if that was a sweater or if that's whatever. But then myself, because I've been doing the production part for so long, I start more from which supplier I'm going to work with. Or it's very integral into, as I'm sketching it, I'm thinking oh, this is something Nepal could do, or this is something to do in Peru. So you get, I don't know how to describe it. It's less freeing, but it's interesting to have confines in a certain way.
I mean, I love the, I agree with you. It's the importance of materiality needs to be re-emphasized all the time, I think, in every facet. So in the studio, it's just because we have different categories, I think there's a little bit of imagination that you can extend to rethinking something for sure. Of course you can do something that's sheer and chiffon that may not have been, done with a certain silhouette, let's say, just for example's sake. But I do think a certain understanding of what the material can do for you. One of my earliest sewing classes was the draping teacher was the fabric is your ally. Don't fight against it, and you should respect it. Because and I do think that's really true. You can't force it to do what it's not built to do. There's other fabrics there are other materials there. It's the same reason why, if you were to sort of say well, I'm going to make this leather bag, there's certain ways to kind of structurally reinforce and maintain the integrity of that bag because of the leather, how you have to work with it. And I think with the start of your question, with the reason that we do simplest materials is that we try to use materials that don't become obsolete. I like the idea of a blank canvas, where it's oh, let's just do, muslin or white cotton or like black silk or something. I mean, even if you look at like Comme des Garçons collections, sitting at like on the rail, Rei Kawakubo will do an entire collection that's actually just muslin, and then you see the fiber content is actually like 50% polyester muslin, but the end result is, they're still working with the fabric to kind of bring something outside of the box, right? So, but also at the end of the day, like that material is still really important. That design team's still working with the material in a way that it's comfortable. I mean, I'm a big believer in like I don't, at the end, you are trying to get that garment onto someone, and I think that's such an important thing, that someone else is going to wear it. And the idea that they can pull it out of their closet and have like a visceral desire to wear it, like, oh, it's my, it's like my favorite like gray sweatshirt. There's a reason why you're thinking that. It's like that material is, reacting with you a certain way, and I think it's the biggest sort of like repulsion when you choose a material that's, you know, like, oh God, like no one's gonna go near this, you know? So, yeah, I mean, you wanna find homes for the things that you make, so.
Okay, that was really interesting. And I'm just thinking about how physically uncomfortable I am right now in my own clothes. Okay, so going on from there, can you tell me a little bit about your design process? Take us through it from like concept to then, prototyping and swatching, making samples, then building a collection, then going to like sales. What does that look like?
Because I've been doing this forever at this point and have no time. That's the one thing every designer I know says, and including myself, like the time, if you have your own business, the time you have to actually sit and design, it's not like in a picture or a movie. There's this beautiful, that's all you're doing all day long. It's so hard to find time. So I have to, like I've learned to, like I do it in the shower or whatever, like on the subway, or it's always in my head. So it's kind of like very edited at this point. And part of the thing is just, developing swatches and things like that if I'm doing knitwear, et cetera. And one thing that's really exciting to do or learn how to do is collaborate with the people you work with. And if you work well with people, they start knowing what you like and how you like things made, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing I was just thinking, like I love looking at the way things are constructed, whether it's buildings or, I love looking at buildings under construction or furniture, et cetera. I also love looking at nature and art and design. So I'm kind of like always looking at things, and I take tons of pictures all the time. Sometimes I don't know what they're for, I just think there's something interesting, like the color combination or the way two things are connected, or even like things maybe at the Natural History Museum or something like that. But last year, a friend had a copy of some vintage book of these photographs by this photographer, Andreas Feininger, and they're blown up shells and sea life that just had beautiful textures and things like that. And I took snaps of some of them, and I sent it to the knitters in Peru, because I had an idea that it could be cool with some certain techniques that I had also seen from them. And so we started that way, making the knit structures for my fall collection. And then they came back with different, I had suggested maybe certain ways of doing it. And then I got a bunch of swatches back, which is cool. And you kind of see what happens a little bit, it's also kind of fun.
Yeah.
That's part of my process.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think like when you do have to work with, I think it's two components. It's like you can start designing in your head, and absolutely, like the only time I get any sort of like clear thinking is like it's like complete isolation. I actually cannot design in my studio with other people around. That is reserved for like admin, management, just like making sure like post design everything is happening to kind of like realize that design, but the genesis of the design has to happen in complete like I have to be by myself, or like I have to like just like take a long walk, or completely like visually feed your brain. I mean, I zone out all the time, like either on the subway or transportation, like something about like moving, like the moving landscape. I can start like my brain kind of goes to white, and then I can start thinking about like unraveling different ideas, and then the designs come through. But inspiration really comes from everything. It's like I can be watching some movie, but then maybe like something the character says triggers something, and I'm like, oh God, yeah, that. And I remember something, and it's like total absent-minded professor. I pull a book out of the shelf, and I'm like, oh yeah, and I look at that. I'm like watching the TV or whatever. So it could be that, but I would say a lot of like the design process comes from like problem solving. So like I always like, especially when I'm like sitting on the subway, like morning commute, and I'm like looking at like, my brain starts to kind of like see what everyone has or owns, you know, everything from like, you know, whatever keychain is hanging off of like the backpack to like, oh, like a bike messenger and it's like lock, you know, and like the lock kind of can sometimes turn into like, oh, that would be a really good bag handle, you know, or like the chain could, you know, turn into something else, you know. So like that's how like my eyes start wandering. But a lot of times it's because it's like I don't like the way that lock is designed, you know, and it's like, oh God, why is it like, oh, that looks so like awkward, and like I could totally do it that way, or it should be this way to kind of streamline it. It's obviously like catching on his like sneaker, and then that thought process starts turning into something else, like, oh wait, sneaker, like I can design a sneaker that's like this, you know. So that stream of consciousness then has to get like edited down and like controlled, and then it's almost like Frankenstein. You know, it's like you start building like, well, what are the body parts going to look like of that bag? You know, like what's the best handle for that, and how does it work? You know, is it trying too hard? I mean, that's another thing. It's like I'm constantly asking questions. Like, does it look like something else I've seen? You know, and then at the end, it's always like, well, you know, can I picture other people using it? Can I picture myself using it? Can I picture like my grandmother using it? You know, and if I can like hit all those marks, then it's like, okay, I think that's like a good design. You know.
Interesting. So what does a collection look for you guys? I mean, one of the goals of the, you know, senior year thesis is to produce a collection, but that's kind of a nebulous topic, and, you know, a nebulous form. What does that look like for you guys?
I mean, for me, so I was just thinking as you were talking, because I've designed things that are meant to be kept for a long time, things don't necessarily expire from season to season. Like if we have a great silhouette that people still want, then I'll just keep doing it. Like sometimes exactly the same thing, like it will just get rehung on the rack, or maybe we add a color, or maybe we change a little detail, like a whatever, trim on the bottom or something like that. So it's kind of building on things that exist that are good, that I know people still want, or sometimes tweaking versions of them or expanding on that idea, like making more silhouettes like a V-neck or a cardigan or whatever, like a crew neck that's doing well, etc. But I think like a rack of things that people can choose from that represent your brand well. And stores all shop differently. Like some stores, all they want is black and white, or some stores want all color, or some stores want whatever, neutral, whatever. Just trying to have a nice offering that you feel good about, that gives people something to choose from, because they most likely aren't going to take the entire rack, but they'll pull things from it. And certain stores, like the online stores, like I sell to Shopbop, that's only online, so they always pick things that are a certain way, that's, you know, photographs in a certain way for online. Usually it's more colorful, usually it's more feminine, they're more item driven. So, you know, having things for stores like that, but then other stores that are more personal and like to outfit people and do more private styling, they buy like a full outfit. So I usually try, and then actually, yeah, a lot of stores do buy from the lookbook. Like they like to see how you styled it, so they will often choose whatever the outfit that you styled. So like kind of thinking about all of that.
Mary, what is it for you? Because I know you speak about a perennial collection with released over the year.
I'd say like take Marsha's advice about doing a collection, because it's like not. I mean, the way we do it is it's so like, I think we literally drive some of our retailers crazy, because they don't. It's either like if they're new to like what we do. They don't understand that it's like a living archive, so it's hit or miss. It's like they either get really excited that they could probably choose from a lot of things, And then we kind of have to see what they choose and see if it's like, if it makes sense. You know, it does, like we've had some great stores, but then like they choose literally like one style, like 5 of them, but then it's like 14 of like something else that's doesn't, you know, at the end of the day, I don't know, for a customer to walk in, that doesn't really, it doesn't really tell what we do, you know, properly. And then it's like, because we put out like categories, you know, like one, the way that the business is defined, where you have specifically like a handbag department buyer, a shoe department buyer, like the different price point buyers, you know, and so then they get confused because they'll come into the showroom and they're like, oh, like where are the garments? And I'm like, oh, I'm not doing garments this season. We're doing, you know, we've never tackled like sunglasses, so this is the first time we're doing sunglasses, and that's it. That's like 6 styles. That's all it is. And they're like, oh no, like we gotta like get our sunglasses buyer in, you know. And then they're all like confused, and they're like, you know, emailing the right person to come in, and then they're like, oh, but we saw like you had these things, you know, X, Y, and Z, and I was like. And for a long time, we would actually provide all that, and production became a total nightmare because I basically, up until like 2010, we were cumulatively bringing every, like, even though it was a mini collection, we would bring it every season to Paris, to one point where it was like, oh, like a simple suitcase turned into like 4 like black, you know, industrial cases that we were dragging around. And my sales director at the time was like, Mary, what's going to happen when you're on like category number 55? You know, like, are we going to bring all this to Paris? And I'm like, yeah, because we got to stick with the concept. You know, like it's just going to be like, you know, like rails of like different categories. And then just producing that became, you know, just crazy, you know. So the smart thing that someone pointed out was like, oh, this is like, you know, it's great because like, it's like your collection can live on like the cloud now because of like, you just have your e-commerce store, and then you can just sell whatever you want to like retail stores that have like a, you know, brick and mortar. But then anyone else that, you know, wants to buy like an archival collection can just go straight to you, because you're kind of like, you know, you have the power to like offer it, you know, or you have the control over it. So, I mean, we still kind of navigate that way. It's not, you know, it's definitely not the easiest thing. It's almost like a micro version of like creating like limited, you know, prints or something. You know, we'll just like make it when you know, we'll hold like a small amount of stock, and then we just have to replenish when a big order comes in, you know. But yeah, it kind of requires a lot of like different muscles of, you know, thinking of like, you know, switching gears. Like, oh, we've got to make a leather handbag for this store, but then now we got to call our shoe factory in Spain because there's like they also want to include like, you know, 6 styles of shoes, so we've got to like have that, you know. So, we definitely do. I mean, that's the thing. It's like a few years back, we did like our first runway show, which was actually a night video that we shot throughout Manhattan of only female skateboarders. But we, you know, styled it with everything from the collection, you know, like okay, well, you know, it's like, well, what's the narrative here? And so because we had that on these skateboarders, that video was presented and people thought that that was like the new collection, but those were pieces that, the sweatshirt collection was from 2004, the white button-down collection was from 2009, and we were just bringing them back again, but we're just showing them a different way. And it was just funny because it's just like a different resurgence in sales, and especially like certain buyers would be like, oh, I love, this is so great. I'm like, and I was like, and it's great that you're buying it again, like 11 years later. And they were like horrified. They were like, no. I'm like, yeah, you carried this same collection like 11 years ago, So this is completely proves my point that like, if you have something that's good, it doesn't need to feel outdated.
That's fascinating. I mean, it also brings up issues around who gets to tell the story around the clothes and how your clothes, if they're going into a retailer, how that the clothing can still speak to your brand or question, speak to the concept of the brand of questioning time in those sorts of spaces. Mm-hmm. But how you can still like maintain your brand identity. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, so this. Oh yeah, please.
That just reminded me of something else. It's kind of practical, but it's really expensive and a lengthy process to make one new item. Yeah. Like making, you come up with a design, you might have to hire a pattern maker if you don't make it yourself, or you yourself spend hours making patterns. You spend all of this effort making whatever it is, like one prototype of one thing to make this sample to photo shoot and show buyers, and it's a huge amount of effort just for like something that for many people is just like, that's it, like they show it, it's done, gone, whatever. And it's so rewarding for many reasons, like to have something that's, has a long life, mm-hmm. because you have put a lot of effort and money into creating it.
Yeah.
So going on from there, I have a couple questions about working in the industry, but I realize I'm also sensitive to opening it up to student questions pretty soon. So maybe this will be my last one, or second to last one. But can you give some tips about how you develop relationships in the industry with retailers, but then also with manufacturers, artisans, producers? How does one do that?
I think it's like, it's personality. I really do think that. It's like the reason that I have the same factories I still work with is because it's like they still just like working with us, and occasionally you'll, probably come across someone that you really, have like a professional chemistry with, where you're on the same page, and it just kind of makes you guys want to like kind of work together and make something. I mean, for me personally, on the manufacturing front, I've definitely had my fair share of like working with like a sewing factory in the garment district that, just like one bad situation after the other kind of like messed up, and I was like, I was like, I don't think we can work together, it just doesn't. And they kind of agree too. They're like, yeah, you're really demanding. I'm like, it's not hard to sew a straight line, and so we have these conversations. Like I walk in and I kind of like, treat some of like, the young person running like the cutting room. He feels like my cousin that I can like kind of push around, where I'm like, dude, where's my cut work? You told me 2 weeks ago and now we're late. And he's like, oh yeah, sorry. And it's like, just don't, but like they get it and then they like step up, but it's you, once you have that kind of rapport, then it's like, okay, fine. But, and similar with like some of my retailers, it's like I ran into, Linda Dresner in Paris, and I don't know if that's kind of like old school for you guys, but she was like one of the first to bring Jill Sander into New York, literally into the States. And she had this beautiful store on Park Avenue, and she still has her store in Birmingham. She was literally the first person that picked up Slow and Steady Wins the Race. And, she's kind of like this mother mentor figure now, because she's still survived and she has like a great eye, and she's, her store in Birmingham is still there, and you know, she's always, you know, she has a great range of like junior to everything like, you know, early Vetmont. She was like probably carrying them first. And so she just still likes to foster all that talent. And she knows, she's just sort of like, she's like, you don't like playing by the rules. I was like, I know. And so sometimes she's just sort of like, you know, here's my order, sorry, it's not that big. And I'm like, it's totally fine. The fact that like you still believe in like, you know, like this one category of like, you know, 3 shapes that we're putting out. And she's like, yeah, I get it, because you're, you know, this is how you think, and you should just keep doing that, you know. And so it's great. It's like I'll see, you know, and like they've become like a surrogate family. So I think you start having those relationships, and it's easier to build on those than, you know, there are plenty of like kind of like one hit misses, or, you know, like maybe one store picks you up for like that one season and then they disappear and they like, you know, pick up something else, and that's just like maybe their MO, you know. But
Yeah, I think I would say like the way you meet your friends or the way you treat your friends or your family is, for me, how I like to work with people. And the same thing, like my factories or my store customers, most of them are like me. They're small, person run, or like sometimes it's 2 sisters, or sometimes just 1 woman, or sometimes it's a husband and wife. Like I think like I tend to work with other small companies, and we kind of try to support each other. And the same way, like you were talking about, like, yeah, you find people who like what you do, and they're excited to see what you do with what they do, and you can have a nice collaboration together, and learn the right way to work together. And yeah, with the same thing with stores, because yeah, I also have sold to stores where they're very something driven, trend driven, or whatever, and they one season are buying who knows what, and then skipping to another thing. But for the most part, I have sold to the same stores for a long time, and they are friends now. And then we can also do nice things together, like do a special collaboration together, or, you know, I make custom things for them and stuff like that. Like we try to work together in a nice way.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Let me open it up to the crowd.
Yeah,
See if
we have a mic there,
Yeah, the
so
mic's coming.
whoever wants to ask a question needs to go there.
I have some more questions, but it's not all about
We can
me,
bring
is
it to
it?
you.
sorry, it's so late.
Who's gonna be the first one?
Everyone's brain dead.
You can call him. You should go to the mic.
Thank you. Hello. I'm really intrigued by this kind of non-compromise, but the positive non-compromise in the way that you wish to work. I was imagining being a buyer when you were, particularly you, Mary, when you produced those iconic bags. I mean, were they confused? Were they getting you? I just feel like perhaps over time they could understand more about you as a brand. But it's like, what were the early days like when you were offering these alternative, I'd say, subversive designs?
The bags, I have to. So the funny history and the story behind the bags is that sort of like literally put what we do immediately in like. I mean, it was crazy. It was like in 45 stores in one season. It was like 10 Corso Como, and then like they saw it, and then it was like Lane Crawford wanted it. Lane Crawford's, you know, it was in Lane Crawford, and Colette came. It was just like this like weird wildfire, you know, and I think for the most part they like. I think it was the right timing. It was like on this sort of, you know, the same wave as like the iconic like status bags, and then a lot of them thought like they got the concept behind it. They're like, oh, there's like a sense of humor here. There's like a slight critique. We're gonna put it out there next to. We're gonna merchandise it next to, you know, like the Balenciaga motorcycle bag or whatever. And that was fine, you know, that was like, it was great that was out there. And then sort of like fast forward a few years, we did a sort of like a more mass collaboration with a company. But part of it is like they wanted to introduce the line to people. They were like, oh, well, let's do also like a pop-up of not just the collection that you did for us, but just like, you know, your own kind of like store. And they did like a purchase, and they had the bags there. And I think because it was in the context of like a more contemporary mass retailer, we started getting legal letters, cease and desist, like thinking that all of a sudden they were knockoffs, you know, which they weren't supposed to be. So, my lawyers and I were on conference calls, mostly with one specific company, one brand, and it was like they're kind of like third-tier lawyers, and it was like literally the lawyer was like, I'm so sorry, I know I have to say this and it's an argument, but I'm just doing my job, you know, like, well, my wife owns the Balenciaga bag, and like, what if she walks in and she sees this and she's really confused because she thinks she's buying the real. I'm like, why are you thinking she's buying the real thing? It's like $100. It doesn't say Balenciaga inside of it. You know, like there's no customer confusion here. You know, but they had to like say it for the record. You know, so then we were just like, this is crazy. You know, like and. I'm probably the worst person to be on those types of like calls because I'm trying to like rationalize the logic, you know? I'm like, don't dumb down the customer. Like if they know they're paying like, you know, $1,300 for a bag, they're not going to think it's the same bag if it's $100, you know? And obviously like they're smart enough to know that, you know? So there's like that whole thing that in the long run, I was like, oh my God, this is like such a amazing, like, you know, contemporary art, like commentary that I can start. I'm going to like display all my lawyer's letters with like, you know, blackout lines, you know, and like frame them, you know, but yeah, it's because they just got, you know, it was fine for whatever reason, if it was in Colette or like at Lane Crawford, but for whatever reason, the minute it was like mass, they started automatically thinking like, oh, it's like only one step up from like a Chinatown, like, you know, counterfeit.
I can kind of understand in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mass retailers do so much knocking off.
Oh yeah, totally.
Even though
Yeah.
you aren't doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, who else? Questions? Yes.
Hello. I was just curious what inspired both of you to incorporate this aspect of sustainability into your work. And also, I know that you mentioned that you hope to be not using any virgin materials by 2020, and that's something that I'm also trying to do, so just wondering why you want to do that.
Well, thinking ahead of the world and what's happening, you know, the natural resources are depleting rapidly, and our ozone is depleting rapidly and all that stuff. And just thinking ahead when there's less water or there is so much waste, like to think of waste, almost like rebranding waste, because it doesn't have to be waste. It could be a resource. Like there's that, do you know Parlay for the Oceans? Mm-hmm. I got to know this company, or it's not a company, it's a non-for-profit called Parlay for the Oceans, and the man who's in charge of it, named Cyril, he's all about harvesting ocean plastic, and yeah, he kind of just retweaked the lingo and it like harvesting and making it into a whole resource of a thing that you can do something with. And then they do collaborations with people. So they make sunglasses with whoever, Oakley or something, or they made sneakers with Adidas, like making something, treating it like a rich resource. And there's tons of it. And there's even right here in Brooklyn, do you know Fab Scrap? That company, it was a woman who used to work, I think, for the sanitation department.
Yeah.
And she noticed, because fashion is the second largest industry in New York besides finance, I think, or tourism. And she just started to notice all of this textile waste everywhere. So she started this nonprofit company that's really cool. And they kind of harvest or rescue or get donated or whatever, all this fabric and yarn and whatever from all these companies. And that's a great place you can go and get tons of things that are great. I feel like it's satisfying and useful to reuse things. And then there's cool things too, like doing that CFDA Lexus project. It did force me, because it was kind of like a project, to like really look for new materials that might exist using recycled things. And I did find all kinds of stuff. Like if you ask, that's something I learned a long time ago. The more you ask for things, the more suppliers know you're looking for them, and they'll start to show them to you.
Yeah.
And so they think like, oh, we know you like this, so we wanted to show you this. And I did find cool stuff down in Peru even, where it is mostly all natural, but they're making yarn out of recycled plastic bottles. And I found this cool felt-like material that's made from recycled plastic bottles that we're making something out of now. And like, I don't know, there's all kinds of cool things to do.
There's like, I know, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's actually, you guys have such a great, I mean, Google is actually great for stuff like this. It's like, you can go down a K-hole, like looking for one thing that leads to another. And like, you have to just kind of maybe get into a moment where you're like, okay, I'm not necessarily going to look at like the usual like channels, let's say, like, and not so much like anything that's like a Google search for like, like fabric XYZ, but like, I think it's like I've found things like that we didn't wind up using, but I don't think I would have ever arrived if I hadn't like been reading some sort of like, okay, like MIT science report, like what's this sort of like thing that's being, reused or whatever. And then that led me to like boltthreads.com in Emeryville, San Francisco, which is, making leather out of mushrooms that they're testing. It's not like commercially viable yet, but they're pretty close. And then they, did their sort of like protein threads with Stella McCartney. And so she's been actually kind of like supporting the use of that like, material in her collections. And it's completely like man-made and like spun, in their facility. And so there's like, and I think like the fact that like bolt threads is something that you can kind of arrive at like really easily. There's got to be so many more companies out there kind of like doing the same thing. And it's true with like, I think people forget like materials it's finite, and so there's just like, I mean, that's the amazing thing about being a designer. It's like you can use your imagination, or like your job is to use your imagination to kind of come up with like just an invention to kind of solve a problem. So so it's not so much even necessarily like using maybe like some like new scientific breakthrough, but like maybe just being smart about how you're gonna like design with that one corner that you have left over from your, roll of fabric or something, and it doesn't even need to be necessarily like, within like a clothing collection. It can wind up being like another object that you're still going to use in your day-to-day life.
You can
Kind of a
first, and
follow-up.
then, yeah, exactly.
Kind of a follow-up to Kate's question. As many brands, I think, struggle with scaling a business sustainably. As both of your businesses grow and get bigger, and you have a larger production, how do you plan on continuing being sustainable through that process?
Do you want to get bigger?
I think, well, Marsha's opening her first store next week, or this Sunday. So I'm like nowhere, like I'm still super tiny. So the good thing is it's like it depends on, kind of going back to like the storytelling, like that the sort of that universe has opened up way more than when I've started. Like I feel like, when we both started at the same time, it's like there was these sort of like guidelines, or not even guidelines, like these are like the rules, like you have to show during spring, summer, fall, winter, and it has to be this and it has to be that, and now I think like there's more openness from actually from everyone. And I think maybe that has something to do with like, social media or Instagram or whatnot, kind of understanding like, it's not just, regulated this way anymore. And like this whole sort of like explosion of like collaborations and like, maybe doing something a different way, doing custom pieces for like stores that you've worked with for a long time, like that's also part of things that you can build into like expanding your company. And again, it's like it's like why would, car companies partner up with like designers, and it could be just marketing, but it's true. It's like designers can totally be part of like a smaller project that redesigns like the interior of a car, and then you can start putting your fingerprint on a lot of things.
Yeah, I think, the industry has changed so much. It's changing like before our eyes every minute. And there was some snippet I read somewhere in Women's Wear Daily or something, and it was like a real estate developer person talking about mall real estate, and he was talking about leases and how, because normally those kind of places would only be doing like 10 or 20-year leases or whatever. And right now, because everything is happening so fast and technology is changing so fast, like 10 years, that's like, how like dog years and human years are measured differently? That's like, I don't even know how many like 100 years, I feel like people are very open to things changing rapidly and being done. I think it's a great time to do what you want and try new things. And yeah, part of opening a store is trying to adjust the balance of direct consumer versus wholesale for my business, which is, like, we do have a direct consumer business to a certain extent, which is online, but then the rest is wholesale. And the way that wholesale works is there's a certain price, and then it gets marked up by the store, and so there's like a kind of a double markup. And companies like Warby Parker, they're called disruptors. If you read all these articles, they've changed the whole fashion landscape, or even just not even fashion, but the way to buy things landscape. And so all stores right now and all designers are kind of trying to readjust and try tons and tons of new things on top of global warming and all these other things. Like, there's a lot of elements that are changing things. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but about scaling. But I would say, yeah, stick to what you're doing already, because there's a reason why people will go to you for what you do. And if you change it, it waters it down, right?
We have 2 questions here.
I'm just going to go so kind of going off of what you both were saying, that study that came out from the UN about the whole, if the humanity as a whole doesn't kind of change the way we're going by 2030, if we don't change our carbon footprint, kind of we may not have a planet to live on anymore, or whatever that was. Addressing that, I was kind of wondering what you guys thought about how to kind of change like how customers will buy more thoughtful, sustainable products like yours, rather than kind of going to mass, fast fashion companies where they can just buy a shirt for $5, and obviously that's not sustainable at all, but kind of what your thought about kind of changing how the market is going, I guess.
Oh my God, I really want to give you a positive answer, like, but it's something. I mean, it's like a psychological, like mind wrestle, because we can kind of like link arms and like create a wall and be like, well, we're gonna do this and we're gonna have best practices and show other people how it's done. But I think you have to remember, I mean, when I travel, I'm always reminded of it. Like in every country, there like another version of an H&M. In the UK, you've got Marks and Spencers, and then like in France, you've got Tati, and like in China, you go to like third, fourth tier cities, and they've got their own kind of brands because they are able to have a very they're just maximizing that streamlined supply chain of like manufacturing. So it's like, oh, you've not only you have Zara and COS and all these other, global cities, but you've got the sort of like versions of Zara and COS and all those, cities as well, and so there's just like, for me, I'm always like, whoa, there's like so much just like stuff, and that's not even just like mass, like that we recognize it as. Like there's still the sort of like a random, sidewalk store, like on like a main strip of Paris, that's like kind of like, oh, like workwear for, women in their 40s or something, and it's like, I don't know, like 6 feet wide, but it still is there, and there's like actually like 5 of them throughout the city, so there's like even like that kind of company out there. So but they're also like really affordable, or like even competitive pricing with like something like a COS, and it's just like tough. And that's like and the thing is, it's like, if you're gonna try to beat out Walmart, that's, or like Target, that's the other thing. It's like, how are you gonna convince them? I mean, I know like Target's been very supportive of like other design initiatives, but at the end of the day, they have their brands in the store that's like $5.99, and like, and I have to say, like, it, I grew up with parents who always like told us like, well, like you're spending money, so you should really look for quality, and like it's better in the long run. You'll keep it. Like my dad loves showing his like coin wallet that he's had since he was like 23. When he got his like first job, and so, but even them, they're like, oh my God, like did you see this? Like, do you know this thing called Target? And I was like, oh no. Like, and then like I go home for Thanksgiving, and my dad's like, I really like this shirt I got at Target. It was only $5, And I was like, no, Dad. Like, what are you doing? And I think when that kind of like meter in your gut or your brain starts going that way, it's, how are you going to convince other people to kind of like flip the switch back? When the fact that there's stuff out there for that price, So I don't know. I think about this all the time, so I haven't thought of like a solution.
I know it's very tricky. It's tricky even for designers who want to do things sustainably, because we also need to be selling things to be in business. But I think, for us, I guess it's finding these particular niche customers who care about that. And I have found them, but they're not every single person, obviously. And then the ones that find you become loyal. Like I do have, they're looking for something like this. But they're not every customer. There's many, many more that are the Zara or et cetera customer. And then just a lot of people who don't even think about it, really. Because there are some that think about it, and many that don't think at all about it, or just think about the cost. or just want something new or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. So jumping off that question, I think there are too many Saras and too many causes that use that same narrative of sustainability, and I think that there's a danger of, that narrative becoming a trend. And I guess designers like you, well, both of you, are, the superheroes of sustainability, but at the same time you need to, well, I don't know if you need to, but I guess there must be a way in which you can defend this, and you can sort of advocate for the communities that you work with, for example, for them to be able to defend themselves from these narratives that are, being overused. How would you approach that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't understand the last part of your question.
For example, with artisans, where they many times market them as, marginalized and poor, and I think what you do is great, where you, go and like speak with them and understand their context. But there are many brands that are obviously much more well known that are using these narratives as well, and that there is a danger of, this becoming just another trend. Like, I guess, recycled fabrics, I mean, so how do you invest, well, I mean, I guess you for the artisans, for them to defend themselves against being marginalized mediatically?
I mean, I agree. There is that danger of it being. What I'm afraid of is that it becomes a trend and it lasts like 2.5 years and people forget and we're on to something else, and all that work of best practices, or like like brands that are doing things only from like recycled or reused materials, whatever, XYZ. Either they kind of get forgotten about, or so they move on. They pivot and they do something else. I don't know. I'm just projecting, it 50-50 chances or whatever. But I always kind of like, I'm a little suspicious half the time. Like, so I always need to do like due diligence when it's like a little bit like too like, like in your face. Like, I mean, it's like I love Fairway, and when I go grocery shopping, and I love grocery shopping, and I can zone out looking at all the boxes. But then it's like sometimes I kind of have to like laugh out loud, because it's like you've got like one whatever, like granola, and it's like the whole back of it is like no GMO, gluten-free, like, and then it's just like I start thinking about that equivalent in what I do. Where like, what if like brands start just like throwing all these sort of like, oh look, like pick me because like I'm so like perfect in all these ways, and then it's like, well, I mean, are you, like, because there are, I have to say, like, there are brands I've noticed popping up on Instagram that like the first tagline is like, like the, newest sustainable whatever, like fashionable tank top line. And all you realize is like, oh, they just use organic cotton. And that is it. It's still made in like Bangladesh, and it's like why are you selling it for like $17? Like what's the true story? But it's like, it looks great on Instagram and it's got the word sustainable on the link to bio, like, so, and then you realize there's so many of them like that now. So it's tough. There's no, I don't know if there's like, someone out there like making the choices, like oh, this one's good, this one isn't, this one's questionable or whatever. But I remember there was like a lecture, I forgot where, but it was like this this one guy. He was a like 45 years carpet manufacturer in Michigan, like near Detroit. And he's like, my business is not, he's like, you know what, like I just made the decision for myself that I was gonna just phase out all the bad machinery that was like creating what I make in carpets, like polluting, the environment. But I didn't have to like tell people about it. I just started doing it. And people still like my carpets. They still look the same. I'm just doing a better job, and I'm not polluting I'm polluting like 2/3 less, But I didn't have to like start stamping like, oh, for market competition, like, oh, the green choice or like eco-friendly or whatever. It was like we were still a family brand. We still had our customers. We still made really good carpets, And I just feel like sometimes like that's maybe all you need, if people just actually, at the end of the day, like what you make and it doesn't fall apart and it's beautiful, you don't really need to like, say, oh, and I don't know, like jumping on the bandwagon, like, oh, and there's this, it's like, I don't, it's like what, like a t-shirt's gonna start like making soup for you, and then like everything is gonna be like, oh, this makes soup for you too, like it's like crazy,
It's tricky. I think one point just to always remember is, like, no matter what it is, sustainable or not sustainable, like, it has to be something that people want to buy and own and wear. Things can get there's so many other things to discuss now, like whatever it is, sustainability or other factors. That is like, you still have to have a thing that people want.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, there's so many, it's very tricky, all the labeling of things. Because you, I don't know.
Yeah.
Want people to know, to distinguish it from something else that's, I don't know, at Target or something like that. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's tricky because you want them just to like the thing.
Oh, totally. I think like especially if you're talking, I mean, everyone here is like super savvy and design conscious, and I think if you were to rewind, like, I don't know, I mean, like 10 years ago when things, there was always this like complaint that like, oh, anything that was like organic cotton brand was like really granola looking, and which was true, that's the thing. It's like, even when I was looking at like, bamboo fabric suppliers, like everything about it, like aesthetically was not appealing, like, and even just the examples, they were like, oh, look, you can like look at this, like, the dress that you can make from it, and I'm like, oh my god, like, why are you like using this as an example, and I mean, personally, I never got behind, like really like Burning Man aesthetic, like, and for some reason, like that for a long time was equated to like, oh, organic, earth-friendly clothing, and it's like shredded knots, and like, oh, you have to like wear butterfly wings or something, it's like, if you can change that aesthetic, that's already like your selling point,
Like Stella McCartney is a great example of something that's completely not Burning Man.
Yeah.
It's, like a stylish, clean looking.
Yeah. No offense if anyone likes Burning Man, but like,
Oh, yeah. Oh, I do. Okay, so in speaking about collaboration, a lot of resources require you to be like an LLC or like a small business to like have availability to the resources, like high-end yarn suppliers and mills. And so I guess my question to you two is, where do you start in this collaboration? Like, to become big enough or to become reputable enough for these mills or artisans or resources to want to work with you? Like, how did it begin?
Oh.
Like, did it keep getting bigger and bigger? Like,
I think it happened organically with us only in the sense that like we kind of already built past kind of like proof of concept where we were doing things that were just a little bit more outside the box and like involving other people. Like I think maybe it started with like installations that also involved like our friends, but that was for a very specific idea. And then I think just right now with the speed of how fast like you can find out about things, you know, I think the more you kind of like, it's like Venn diagram after Venn diagram, Venn diagram. It's like, you know, you wind up realizing like, oh, like this person contacted you because they either saw something on Instagram or, you know, or they were like, oh yeah, like I actually, or something way more old school organic, like, oh, I was actually at this company and I was like the person like in charge of whatever when you did this. And now I'm here and I remembered you, you know, and I want to, you know, do something. Yep.
And then were you also asking about collaborating with actual manufacturers or mills or? Yeah, it's tricky being a student and getting fabrics and yarns. I mean, as a designer, either for a company or for yourself, most mills have an agent, and there are a lot of agents in New York or anywhere else in their territories. So, like, let's say there's a mill from wherever, Italy, but then they have a New York agent, and that agent often represents maybe like 10 different mills, and so you can go to their office and see all the things they have. And then buy, you know, at the, it's not really wholesale, but kind of, yeah, it is wholesale. It is, like if you would go to a yarn store, you'd be buying retail, or the same thing with the fabric stores, like on 39th Street or whatever, you're buying retail. But if you go to the agent or the direct person for the mill, you're buying it at wholesale. So you have to, I mean, I guess there's fabric fairs and yarn fairs, like PV is one. Or Spin Expo is one for yarn. Like, I would suggest going to those things, and then you can kind of get to know what yarn mills are interesting to you or what agents look interesting, and also which ones. Some of them are much bigger and some of them are much smaller, but a lot of mills now have stock service, which is really great. And like for us, it's amazing. And it's actually, I think, more sustainable anyway, because you're using something that's already produced. Or they're producing because there's a demand for it, so it's kind of always in stock. Like certain, whatever, yarn counts of merino wool, they have like a really big color choice card, and you can go and you can get 1 kilo. So it's really affordable. If you're a small designer, you can just get only what you need, as opposed to like certain other, I guess, qualities that maybe aren't in demand or they're more specialized or whatever. You might have to order a whole minimum, whatever it is, like whatever, 1,000 yards of something. So you really have to commit to it. But there's tons and tons of stuff out there that if you do research, you can figure out which mills are best for you to work with. But yeah, I would say go to those. Do you guys do that? Go to PV and Spin Expo and things like that?
I've heard of both of them before, actually, but never been.
They happen, usually
Definitely
there's
in New York now.
2 times a year. There's usually a fall one where which is usually in the summer, where they present all their new fall yarns because designers have to work ahead of time. And then there's a spring one, which is in the winter because the same thing. Designers are working in the opposite direction. And then, there's a really good one actually that is kind of weird but good. That's, what is it called? It's always at the Pennsylvania Hotel. It's something like DM. It's its own, what is it? No, it's a fabric and yarn, more fabric actually, show that's all these mills who have all kinds of stock service stuff. So it's really good if you're making stuff in New York actually, because you can find people who you can buy like 1 yard of shirting fabric from, and they're really happy about it. They're not disgruntled about it. Like that's what they do. I can try to remember it. Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
What is, or DA.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I found
a lot of jobbers.
But I found like some good suppliers there actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, going back a little bit on the ideals that fast fashion ingrained into the modern society and the contrast between sustainable fashion and fast fashion, especially on the price point. How do you approach this conversation of should fashion be luxury and like should we invest more money in it, or should we make sustainable fashion more closer to the price point that people already used to paying?
I mean, convince H&M to be like just be best practices and like don't burn like $1.3 billion of like unused merchandise so you can like, fuel like the Swedish town that you're like headquartered in and like emitting like, who knows what kind of gas if you're burning like polyester, like that's a New York Times article that came out, it's, start there, and of course, the one thing I do have to say is the fact that like, things are affordable out there because there's it's addressing a situation where not everyone. I have like emails from customers who are like, from who knows where, like either Croatia or like in America, and they're just like, I'm so happy that I'm like able to buy like your $250, like leather tote or whatever, and I've like, it's my dream thing, and I literally have an email where someone was like, oh, I saved like for 5 years, like my side job money, and so you're reminded that like there are people who are like, yeah, like, because the reality is that they, like going to Target or Walmart is there to serve a certain, socioeconomic, reality that's out there. And so, and then so when you think of the fact that there's so much disposability on that scale too, when you think about it, it's like, there is that psychology of like, well, I only paid like $5 for it. Who cares? Like that goes out the window, then maybe it has to start on that level, first. And in the studio, whenever we have summer interns, that's I always do a reverse engineering project. So so I'm like, okay, so let's say you have $10 and you've got to make, we've got to make this, let's say it's like a tote bag or something. And so they start doing the math backwards, being in New York, and then they think about it and they like pause for a second and they're like, wait, but then if I go to like, Forever 21 and there's like a motorcycle jacket for $11.99, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, regardless of scale at that point, do the math backwards, like, where is it made? How much is that person getting? And that is just labor, like you haven't even included the zipper, you haven't even included the lining, you haven't even included like, the care label that gets printed, and is sewn, into it. So, and so you're talking like pennies, and then it's just like this sort of like, like unraveling starts to happen. But
I was just thinking, I went to the Copenhagen Fashion Summit this year, which is in May in Copenhagen, and it's I'm not sure how many years they've been having it, but it's all these people. It's kind of like TED Talks almost about sustainability. And there are lots and lots of panels like this of different people. And they did have a lot of companies that were larger, like H&M or Nike or Levi's or whoever. Like they had a lot of people who were either, like, or Stella McCartney was there. Some of the companies have sustainability departments and some of them don't. And a lot of them were there it was kind of interesting. And I think they were there because they were big companies. There was probably some sponsorship element to the whole thing. But they were also questioning, they were trying to figure it out because they're aware of it, but they are trying to figure out like how to survive. But then they also, it was really interesting, there were a few factory people that were part of the panels. And there was one man from Bangladesh who's become kind of an activist. He wasn't, well, it was because of Rana Plaza, but he wasn't involved. But he himself apparently has a fair wage factory and whatever, but he's become like this big activist. And so he was speaking. And there was a woman who worked for a really big Chinese factory that services those kind of companies, those larger companies. And she was just talking about, like, yeah, it's insane. The cost of a T-shirt that's $5, like they literally want to pay things like 18 cents for it, for everything, including that's like labor, materials, and whatever. And she was getting really angry as, because she was the person in charge of costing and making these deals with these companies. But I have lots of materials from that still in a bag actually, and there are all these companies there that are different. Fair trade and fair wage organizations like in the EU or US, but some of them had these great charts, like different pie charts, and there was one of a T-shirt that was kind of cut up like a pie chart, and it has like a certain amount of materials, and marketing takes up a giant section, marketing and advertising and whatever, but labor is like this tiny sliver, and even materials are a pretty small sliver. That answers any questions, but it's food for thought.
Well, just to kind of follow up on what you guys are talking about, I saw on Moda Operandi today, or I don't know how you pronounce that, what looked like layaway, like you pay a bit now and you can pay more later I haven't seen that in a while. But to allow people to actually afford a garment that costs more to make, so that you do pay maybe $50 now, but then you pay another $50 in a month, and another $50 in a month, and another $50 in a month. So there are many strategies at the level of production, but also at the level of distribution and sales, and that we can start to think about and ask questions about. This has been amazing. Your work overlaps so much, but then it's also very different from one another. And so I hope that you see like two examples of very distinct design processes with shared goals of producing garments that are meant to last. Thank you very much to both of you for coming. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And yeah.